6 years and 1 day after Hitler invaded Poland, Japan signed the Instrument of Surrender. September 2nd, 1945. No one will ever know how many died. No one will ever know the name of the first or the last victim. But they are the story of the Second World War. Not the tanks that could not move, or the planes that could not fly, or the ships that could not sail without them. War is about people, in uniform or not. People in cities, villages, jungles. Strangers as allies. Neighbors as enemies. Hundreds of millions of people for whom for 6 years and 1 day there was hell on earth. Japan, at war in China, was building its empire. The Soviet Union had treaties with Japan on its eastern and Germany on its western borders. Germany was building its empire in Europe. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Luxembourg, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium were all occupied. And France was conquered and divided. By the summer of 1940, Hitler had just one place left to deal with.
If the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
Churchill said that the Battle of Britain was about to begin. He was right.
With the fall of Europe and Germany sitting on the doorstep, so to speak, Britain was the only thing that stood in the way of total German conquest of Europe.
But it would not be fought on the beaches, landing grounds, fields, streets, and hills. It would be fought in the sky.
Germany, in order to invade, had two goals: to knock out the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force. And they had to attack the Air Force first, because if they went for the Navy, obviously the Air Force would defend the Navy. So that was the goal. German air superiority, knock out the RAF.
Hermann Göring commanded the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. He said,
"The Führer has ordered me to crush Britain with my Luftwaffe. I plan to have this enemy down on his knees so that an occupation can proceed without any risk."
The first phase of the Battle of Britain, the fight for air supremacy over southern England, commenced on July the 10th. Young men and their aircraft, both untested in battle, were sent up to meet waves of German bombers targeting the Channel, hoping to draw the Royal Air Force into fatal combat.
Phase 1 of the Nazi plan called for the RAF to be knocked out of the air. But the men of the RAF hadn't read the Nazi plan.
Even though you think of it as British, it really was an international force, because you had Australia, for instance, we had 30 or so pilots. You had Poles, Czechs who had come from fallen Europe. You even had 5 Americans flying in there, a couple of Jamaicans. It was an international force designed, dedicated to defending Britain. Germany had consistent waves of attacking aircraft. Bombers escorted by a large number of fighter aircraft.
Hundreds of planes, bombers, fighters, dive bombers.
It really was designed to bring the RAF down as quickly as they could. They attacked the convoys in the Channel. That was the first stage of the Battle of Britain.
Göring opposed the RAF with 3 Luftflotte, numbers 2 and 3 flying out of France and Belgium, and Luftflotte 5 flying from Denmark and Norway across the North Sea. A Luftwaffe pilot thought it a marvelous sight. Wherever one looks, he said, are our aircraft. The first stage, aimed at gaining air superiority over the Channel, was dubbed Canal Kampf, Channel Fight. As well as bombs, the Luftwaffe was dropping leaflets over England. They were headed, "A last appeal to reason."
Hitler would have liked a negotiated peace, but Britain obviously wasn't going to have anything to do with that.
By the end of July, Reichsmarshal Göring was forced to revise his strategy. Failing to draw the RAF out, he would attack them directly. A coded message from Göring, intercepted by British intelligence, read,
To all units of Luftflottes 2, 3, and 5. Within a short period, you will wipe the British Air Force from the sky. Heil Hitler!
This new strategy was Adler Angriff, Attack of the Eagle. It would start on Adler Tag, Eagle Day, August 13th, 1940. An RAF order of the day told pilots,
The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Members of the Royal Air Force, the fate of generations lies in your hands.
August 8th, 1940, and the battle for Britain is on. Across that 21 miles of channel, that 8 short minutes of water.
Hundreds of aircraft in 4 successive assaults attempted to break the southeastern defenses. Churchill's chief military assistant, General Hastings Hug Ismay, reported,
The map table showed new waves of attackers crossing the coast. Heavy fighting throughout the afternoon, and at one moment, every single squadron in the group was engaged. There was nothing in reserve.
Britain realised too, the best way to knock out a Messerschmitt, for instance, was a close quarter front-on attack. So we always hear about, looking at them, staring in the whites of their eyes. But this is what was happening. They flew as close as they could and they fired head on. Really dangerous, really risky, but very effective.
On August 16th, Winston Churchill visited 11 Group headquarters in Uxbridge. He was visibly moved by what he saw, and on the 20th, rose in the House of Commons to declare that
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
Britain's lead in radar, the opportunity to recycle downed pilots, the successful ramping up of aircraft production, the quality of the Spitfire and Hurricane aircraft, and a flexible command structure made Fighter Command a resilient and tough opponent. And at the business end was skill and courage. On August 18th, Winston Churchill had sent 150 precious tanks to Egypt, suggesting he believed the threat to the Suez Canal more real than the threat of an invasion to Britain. On the 24th, having sailed around the Cape, the tanks arrived at Port Said.
Oh, we had the small tank with 2 machine guns on, a .5 and a 303. They were quite nice for nipping about on, but as far as fighting is concerned, there were no match for the Germans, of course.
On September 13th, the Italians entered Egypt from Libya. Mussolini's move into Egypt was not his only flourish. When, in 1939, Hitler had grabbed all he wanted of Czechoslovakia, Mussolini complained,
The Italians will laugh at me. Every time Hitler takes a country, he sends me a message.
He reversed the roles, to Hitler's annoyance, on October 28th, telling Hitler,
Führer, we are on the march. Victorious Italian troops crossed the Greco-Albanian frontier at dawn today.
Italy invaded when Greece responded to Mussolini's ultimatum with a single word, Ochi, no.
Italian divisions were absolutely tiny. He talked of divisions because it sounded so grand, but most of them were no more than a couple of regiments.
A week later, the Greek army counterattacked, and a commanders' meeting discussed Germany's Mediterranean strategy. Hitler's adjutant, Gerhard Engel, admitted of the Führer.
At the moment, he does not know what he wants to do.
But because he had been, if you like, Hitler's mentor in the early days, Hitler had a sort of strange commitment to him, in a way, a genuine friendship.
Two weeks later, the Greek army defeated the Italian Ninth Army, exposing Hitler's southern flank and forcing his hand.
Mussolini's Greek campaign is a perfect example of all that could go wrong when you have a dictator who doesn't listen to his military professionals.
By the time it went wrong, the Battle of Britain was history.
The gratitude of every home in our island, in our empire, and indeed throughout the world, goes out to the British airmen who, undaunted by odds, unwearied in their constant challenge and mortal danger, are turning the tide of the world war by their prowess and by their devotion.
Between August 24th and September 3rd, the attacks launched by the Luftwaffe on airfields and aircraft factories had cost Germany 380 planes. The RAF lost 286. And then the battle changed. On September 7th, radar reported the approach of hundreds of aircraft.
375 German planes came roaring up the Thames River. The Battle of Britain became the Battle of London.
The RAF sent up 11 squadrons to intercept further attacks on airfields and installations.
Facing odds of 6, 8, 10 to 1, dove in, shouting the old hunting cry, tally-ho!
But on September 7th, airfields were not the target.
The air raid alarm went at about 11 o'clock, and we got up and walked out into the street, and one of the things we saw was above the city, the aircraft flares dropping over the city. And that's when my dad realized that we were going to be the target. which we were.
Nazi high explosives wantonly poured down upon England, upon shops and mills, upon homes and farms.
Londoners everywhere witness scenes like these throughout the night. As in London, the people there bear the brunt of Nazi ferocity.
The first raids hit the London docks, and to those who were there, it left memories as vivid as the night sky.
If I say the sky was black, I'm not exaggerating. It was black, with the big bombers going over and darting in between with the Spitfires.
Every night for 8 weeks, 200 German bombers and more to sweep over London and deliver their deadly cargo.
The night sky above London burst into flames.
The period between September and November 1940 has been referred to as the Great Fire of London. On one night, 1,500 fires were started by German bombs.
Raids hit London, Southampton, Bristol, Cardiff, Liverpool, Manchester, and more.
German bombers came in over the city in waves of deadly efficiency.
Anti-aircraft batteries brought down one aircraft for every 30,000 shells fired. But the writer George Orwell said that, at an average cost of £5 per shell, they were well worth it for the effect on morale.
The Nazi psychology was simple and uncomplicated. Break the back of London and its overcrowded millions, and England would beg Hitler to come in and take over, if only to stop the nerve-shattering raids. Around the clock, the German planes spread a sheet of flaming death over London.
The Führer believed the bombing would drive Britain to submission, without the need for an invasion. He was wrong, and such predictions about the collapse of morale were wrong wherever bombs were dropped.
They were to perform the impossible. They were to survive.
So many civilians were killed, so much destruction. But it really, really consolidated the people.
Civilians had to be involved. They needed to feel that they were participating.
They were part of the fight. They were willing to put up with everything that was happening.
Air raids and mass bombings were intended to degrade and demoralise civilian populations, and that did not happen. The British population, broadly speaking, did remain defiant and stoical and even humorous in those circumstances.
And they knew, too, that Britain was not going to lose.
Theirs was the unquenchable spirit that triumphed over evil and sent Hitler down to defeat.
In October, the Luftwaffe lost 379 planes to the RAF's 185.
Another. And another. 169 in one day. The equivalent of 12 or 14 squadrons. How long can the Nazi Air Force stand such losses?
A German pilot described the flight back to base as being a track across waters, dotted with parachutes, pilots in their life jackets, and greasy oil slicks. By the middle of September, it was evident that victory in the air was not going to be achieved.
Had they stuck to a tactical doctrine of knocking out the Air Force and then clearing the way for an invasion, they may have had a chance. The decision to bomb London and to go further was a clear mistake. It's not precision bombing, and in terms of terrorising the population, which was one of the aims, that didn't succeed.
The Blitz would continue until May 1941, but the Battle of Britain was over.
They leveled thousands upon thousands of homes and damaged millions of others. They killed more than 40,000 men, women, and children, and seriously wounded 50,000 more. But not one single Nazi soldier set foot on British soil.
From July 10th to mid-November, total German losses were 1,818 aircraft, British 995. When Winston Churchill visited the devastated areas, he wept.
All the world that is still free marvels at the composure and fortitude with which the citizens of London are facing and surmounting the great ordeal to which they are subjected, the end of which, or the severity of which, cannot yet be foreseen.
Though Britain's immediate hopes are centered on its fighter command and the ability of the RAF to repulse Nazi air invaders, equally important in the Empire's war effort is the Royal Air Force Bomber Command.
Britain essentially stands alone with the support of the Commonwealth. All of its European allies have gone. The United Kingdom wants the support of the United States in the war. It wants to draw them in to the war. It needs to demonstrate that it is still a viable ally, that is still fighting. So it needs to take the war to the Germans.
And the phrase which fits our present sentiment is, they've got it coming to them. They, that is the Germans, have got it coming to them.
Before the end of August, Bomber Command of the RAF had begun its campaign against German cities.
Round-the-clock bombing by the RAF has recently set up new records for intensity of attack. And daylight raids have been causing ever-increasing dislocation of the German war effort in occupied territory. Great damage has been done by day and night. And we have Mr. Churchill's word for it that even this big offensive will be improved upon.
Well, the so-called area bombing, that's to say the bombing of entire cities, arose from the inability of the British Air Force to find its targets. So the best it could hope to do was to drop bombs over very large urban areas.
Mass aerial bombing allowed a new weapon, a new form of warfare to be opened, and that was economic warfare. By destroying its production facilities, its armament factories, its oil facilities, it reduced the German ability to actually fight.
Factories, warehouses, railroads, submarine bases, shipyards, docks, airfields, and oil refineries.
And the British took the view that if you annihilated not merely the factory, but also all the infrastructure around it, then you would ensure that factory could not be easily repaired.
Each speck of light a blazing German building. Easy enough to realize the catastrophe, the concentrated chaos that is overwhelming the city below.
It's a strange dichotomy that Britain had endured the Blitz, and the Blitz was seen as actually drawing the British people together and uniting them in defiance. And yet 2 years later, it was assumed that an even heavier form of bombing campaign on Germany would break their morale. The evidence for this was quite simply non-existent.
The wartime death toll in German raids on a dozen or more British towns and cities was 60,000. The death toll from the Allied bombing offensive against Germany is estimated at 600,000.
Press home your attack. If you individually succeed, you will have delivered the most devastating blow against the very vitals of the enemy. Let him have it right on the chin.
Italian losses are put at about 60,000.
The day after Italy entered the war, June 1940, the bombs started to rain on the country.
In the Ruhr, in the Rhineland, then northern Italy, planes of the Bomber Command have pounded away at Nazi dockyards.
Turin was bombed, Milan was bombed, and the bombs were so frequent that everyone was spending time in shelters or had transferred to the countryside.
Now is not the time, in any way, to ease up, but to put on what indeed may prove the final spurt.
500,000 Soviet civilians were killed in air raids. More than 300,000 Chinese were victims of Japanese bombing. and up to 500,000 Japanese were killed by bombs.
Families have lost everything they own. Forced evacuation has torn children from parents, husbands from wives.
We can see from the kind of homes that were wrecked how indiscriminate the attack was.
The British took a rather dim view of the civilian populations of nations and thought they would be terrorised and they would hate these stresses and strains area bombing placed on them. But that just made them all the more determined to fight and win. And that was something that the British bombing campaign never took account of.
One of the most significant differences between the ideological justifications used by the Allies and those used by the Axis powers is that the Allies didn't believe that victims that they did kill through their bombing policies needed to be wiped out so that their societies could coexist.
Hitler did. Hitler was, he said himself, fighting a race war. He announced,
"We shall strike towards the east next spring."
Part of his plan was to avoid going further west, but always to the east. He wanted to occupy the vast agricultural areas in the east that he saw as occupied by inferior Slavic peoples.
The concept of race as applied to Jewry is contentious and has changed over time. For most of Jewish history, there was never such a question.
The Nazis called the racial issue that obsessed them the Jewish problem. The document proposing the final solution to that problem was presented to Göring on March 26, 1941. Göring signed the plan on July 31st and put in charge the head of the Office of Reich Main Security, Reinhard Heydrich, one of the principal architects of the Holocaust. By then, Polish Jews had long since been imprisoned in ghettos.
The ghettos were absolutely appalling places, and as the war progressed, they became worse and worse.
30,000 people, men, women, children, babies, pregnant women, old people, sick people, you name it, a whole population. You had to move into the poorest part of town, little shacks.
The Warsaw Ghetto contained about 500,000 people, and they were housed in an area of 1.3 square miles. That means that there were approximately 7 people to every available room.
There was very, very little difference between concentration camps and ghetto.
Prisoners, the inmates, were exposed to forced labor, to appalling housing and medical conditions, to starvation.
The daily dose of calories was about 400 calories per person per day. Later, it was reduced to 200 calories. So it was enormously low, as you would expect.
Because of the hygienic condition, typhus set in. So we had a double whammy.
This was very much intentional. This was intended by the German occupation. Firstly, because of their disregard for human life in Eastern Europe. And secondly, in order to feed the German population.
But it was a kind of transit vehicle to confine, to incarcerate ghettos, to concentrate them, to destroy the context between Jews and non-Jews, to isolate them, and to expose them to conditions where they later, once they were not anymore required as forced laborer, could be exterminated. In other words, inmates of ghettos lived on borrowed time.
In 1940, people were being killed by bombs and by murder squads. But no armies were fighting on European soil. But there was fighting in China and in Africa. In August, as bombs fell on London, Italian troops occupied British Somaliland. To oppose Italian occupation, an Allied force under General Platt entered Eritrea from Sudan. A second force, under General Sir Alan Cunningham, moved north from Kenya.
Mussolini's declaration of war found the British forces in Egypt ready for him. Every man in the army eager to get at the enemy after the many months of training and the long period of waiting to be properly in the war.
Cliff Everton had enlisted in his native South Africa.
We travelled hundreds of miles, and we did most of that on foot.
This will give you an idea of the tough country the British troops of Wavell's army tackled in their drive.
We had troop carriers, but the terrain in that part of Africa was mostly desert, so you spent half the time pushing your truck out of the sand. We went into our first action. Of course, we were all new recruits, haven't a clue what was going on. Even the officers were as green as grass.
The force advancing into Eritrea faced stern resistance and terrible terrain. General Platt described their battle for Keren.
A ding-dong battle, a soldier's battle, fought against an enemy infinitely superior in numbers, on ground of his own choosing, which gave him every bit of observation against the movement of our troops.
Indian troops climbed the rugged heights from which Italians poured fire down on them, overcoming their enemy in what General Wavell told Churchill was a tough nut to crack.
Does you good to see these gents with their hands up, doesn't it? And how about the Hun? It's better still to see him making the old familiar sign of camarade.
Cunningham's force took 50,000 prisoners, gained more than 930,000 square kilometers at the cost of 135 men killed and 4 captured.
With indomitable courage, they drove the Italians foot by foot from their position, supposed to be impregnable. Casualties are high, but the haul in prisoners is immense.
A British veteran of the fight said,
"Those who fought on other fronts know that nothing was worse than Keren."
General Platt had told his men that the battle
will be won by the side which lasts longest. I know you will last longer than they do, and I promise you, I will last longer than my opposite.
They lasted longer, but their war was just beginning.
All the soldiers that were involved in the East Africa campaign were boarded onto troops' ships, and we sailed right up the Red Sea, right up to Egypt.
For many, the war would continue along the North African littoral and on into Italy. They would not stop fighting until the war ended. But by then, it would be a very different war. A war in which Britain would have to fight in Europe, in Africa, and in Asia. This was the nightmare that, in 1940, made Winston Churchill, the great enemy of appeasement, yield to Japanese pressure and close the Burma Road.
The Burma Road, which was essential to get supplies to the 45 Chinese divisions fighting the Japanese and to ensure that they were kept in the war. They were flying supplies over the hump, over the Himalayas.
On the day the Burma Road was closed, the military party in Japan triumphed, and General Hideki Tojo became Minister for War. Little more than a week later, the Japanese government announced plans for a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere.
Japan was a militarist regime, and what that meant was that really the admirals and the generals had taken over every aspect of Japanese government, politics, foreign policy. They'd seized control of the country and its destiny.
Kuribayashi had volunteered to fight for his emperor as soon as he was old enough.
Japan had to develop the continent. In Manchuria, Japan had to control China. That's what my father said. There was no issue. In my village, I was called a patriotic child. I thought I should go and join the war against China.
The Emperor Hirohito observed,
Premier Konoye seems to consider that the China incident will not be settled easily and favors advancing to the south.
On September 27th, Japan signed a tripartite pact with Rome and Berlin.
The three aggressor nations of Europe and Asia joined forces. The German Führer was well disposed toward making an alliance with any nation which would help further his own greedy aims. The rejoicing Japanese knew that after their 350 years of waiting, their day of destiny was at hand.
Haro Yoshimichi, president of Japan's Privy Council, understood the path the nation was on.
The pact is a treaty of alliance with the United States as its target. I assume that the United States will put economic pressure on Japan. She will probably ban the export of oil and iron.
The Axis controlled just 3% of the world's oil production and 4% of its refinery capacity. Stalin would later say that the war had been decided by engines and octane. When German troops entered Romania, plugging a gap in their eastern front, they secured control of Ploiești, the productive Romanian oil field that was the source of 94% of German oil imports. On the day after the move into Ploiești, President Roosevelt said,
"The time may be coming when the Germans and the Japs will do some fool thing that will put us in. That's the only real danger of our getting in."
Following the announcement of the Tripartite Pact, Churchill reopened the Burma Road, and the British government granted Chiang Kai-shek a £10 million loan.
I think everyone in Britain regarded the event as definitely good news. And now war supplies are steadily on their way to the Chinese army again.
With the communists and nationalists agreeing that they would fight the Japanese rather than fighting each other, China's politics changed as well. It didn't become democratic in the sort of liberal sense. There was more pluralism. There was more opportunity for people to debate new ideas about the kind of society that would be constructed after the war was over.
In Vienna on the 20th of November 1940, with Hitler in attendance, Hungary joined the Axis. Romania was 3 days behind, Slovakia 1 day later. On December 18th, Hitler issued Directive 21.
The German armed forces must be prepared, even before the conclusion of war against England, to crush Soviet Russia in a rapid campaign.
They start the planning for an operation against the Soviet Union, still really thinking about the British. The idea is if they can knock out the Soviet Union, the British will realize they have no more allies left, not even a potential ally in the form of the Soviet Union. And then finally, the British will see reason as the Germans see it and make some kind of peace terms. So they're still thinking just very strategically.
By the end of January 1941, the Japanese Ministry of Finance had authorized the printing of occupation money for the Philippines, British Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies. On February 1st, rice rationing was introduced, and the ambassador to Vichy was instructed to tell the Vichy government that the Japanese army would push into Indochina, placing Japanese aircraft within reach of Malaya and the East Indies. The American Secretary of State pressed Roosevelt for fresh sanctions, which the US Navy War Plans Division warned
would probably result in a fairly early attack by Japan on Malaya and the Netherlands East Indies, and possibly involved the United States in early war in the Pacific.
So America imposes these restrictions on Japan. And for Japan, that just underlines everything they've always been worried about. The fact that somebody out there can cut off our oil, which we need. The fact that somebody out there, another power, can restrict our capital, can inhibit our exports. In a sense, it sort of crystallizes the feelings of insecurity that have become increasingly evident in Japan throughout the interwar years.
At sea, an American warship is the stage for historical drama almost without parallel in world diplomacy.
In August 1941, Churchill and Roosevelt met for the first time as wartime leaders. Churchill sailed aboard the Royal Navy's finest, the Prince of Wales, to meet the president at Placentia Bay in Newfoundland.
The two greatest leaders of the freedom-loving world are ready for the historic conference.
When Churchill went to meet Franklin Roosevelt, it was as though, somebody said, it was as though he was going to meet God. He regarded Roosevelt as somebody, the only person really, who could definitely save Britain.
It was difficult for countries to know each other. Imagine what it's like with no television, no internet. If you're an American president and you met a British prime minister, you didn't necessarily have a lot in common.
The most impressive scene witnessed on the deck of the Prince of Wales was the service. A service in which every man present, from Premier and President to ordinary seaman, dedicated himself anew to the securing, with God's help, of freedom for the whole world.
The leaders issued a press release that has become known as the Atlantic Charter. We fight according to the Atlantic Charter, not for territory and power, but for rights and principles. Some have been ignored, some trashed, but none could be unsaid. They survive still as the basis of the Charter of the United Nations. Churchill's deputy, Clement Attlee, broadcast news of the Charter, which greatly disappointed those listening on the radio. The United States was not joining the battle. Four months after Churchill had sailed to Placentia Bay aboard HMS Prince of Wales, she was sunk by Japanese aircraft off the coast of Malaya. Churchill said, "I never received a more direct shock." The sinking of two of the Royal Navy's finest ships closed a tumultuous year. British troops from Egypt arrived in Greece at the beginning of 1941.
Once Italy drew Greece into the war, that drew the British into Greece. Once the British were in Greece, then Germany's vital interests in the south were in jeopardy. Therefore, they had to now counter the British threat.
We battled in Greece. Most of our tanks were we to destroy ourselves because we didn't have spares. Just north of Thebes somewhere. And the planes came over and we piled into a ditch. They caught it with a bomb. And then the order came through, every man for himself. The Greek government had collapsed. So that was it.
A month after British troops arrived in Greece, Germany invaded and dismembered Yugoslavia, which surrendered on April 17th. On April 27th, with German troops in Athens, Greece surrendered.
Their courage, their endurance, their repeated proofs of an unconquerable spirit, their sufferings, their sacrifices will not be in vain.
After British troops were evacuated to Crete, Ultra Intercepts, the code breakers at Bletchley Park, warned of an impending invasion. German parachutists descended on the island, harnessed by a single strap to a canopy over which they had no control.
German paratroopers dropped from a very low height, that they were subject to a great deal of small arms fire and suffered very heavily on the descent.
Poor communication meant that the defenders did not capitalize on their success.
These pictures tell their own story. The Luftwaffe bombing Greece almost at will because we hadn't enough planes with which to beat them back. More long-range fighters, more bombers, more planes and machines of every kind are needed now.
Other failures followed, and on May 27th, General Freyberg, Allied commander, declared the battle lost. Staff Sergeant Raymond Ryan was on Crete.
I woke to find white flags fluttering everywhere. On inquiring as to what was up, I was told that HQ had gone during the night, leaving orders to surrender.
Impatient for orders to go in and evacuate the troops, Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham advised,
"If, gentlemen, you order the army in Crete to surrender, the fleet will still go there to bring off the Marines."
The Germans now had Crete, they now had its airfields, they could now project naval and air power across the Mediterranean.
A week after the evacuation, British and Free French forces invaded Syria and Lebanon. James Gordon was with the 2/31st Australian Battalion. His Victoria Cross citation said,
He crept forward, over an area swept by machine gun and grenade fire, and killed the 4 machine gunners with bayonet.
On May 10, 1941, Adolf Hitler's deputy Rudolf Hess had flown to Scotland. Running out of fuel, he was obliged to parachute to Earth, broke an ankle, and was arrested by a startled ploughman. His mission sent Hitler into a rage. Hess had taken it upon himself to warn the British of what was about to happen.
The hour has come in which it is necessary to go into action against the conspiracy of Jewish Anglo-Saxon warmongers and Jewish powerholders of the Bolshevik Center in Moscow.
The hour was June 22nd, the 129th anniversary of Napoleon's invasion of Russia. 151 German divisions, supported by 40 from the Axis allies, more than 3 million men, stormed forward in 3 giant thrusts, aimed at Leningrad, Kiev, and Smolensk. British experts gave the Red Army 10 days. American experts, between 1 and 3 months. History tells a different story.